joining us for tonight's show. My name is Keiko Agena, and I am one of the new members of Impro Theater Main Company. Now, we recognize the immense challenges that artists and theater companies are still facing in the light of the pandemic. In our mission to spread joy, Impro has been active throughout the pandemic. In addition to our classes going online, we have presented over 350 live streamed shows for free. So I'm here, you guessed it, to ask for your support in our mission. Now, when you support Impro, you are helping us to offset those costs, to expand our programming, to strengthen our community, and to spread joy. And you're not only helping the performances, you're also helping the school, which is a vital, safe, welcoming place for artists of all levels and backgrounds. And we've made it very easy to make a donation. Just go to improtheater.com, click the donate button, or you can go to, you can text it from your phone, text Impro to 44321. That's 44321, text Impro. And we are a nonprofit organization, so it's completely tax deductible. Well, thank you very much for listening to this pitch and for making a donation. And please enjoy the show.
Impro Theater and the cast and crew of this online performance would like to take this time to honor the indigenous peoples of the ancestral and unceded homelands we each inhabit, and to consider the legacy of colonization. In Los Angeles, we pay our respect to the Gabrielina Tongva peoples. Impro Theater supports the promotion of an anti-racist world, where we recognize diversity, equity, and inclusion as central to our values. We are listening, learning, and growing. We invite you to join us in taking action wherever we can to create a more just world.
Hey everybody, welcome to Impro Talk. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Mike Rock. Today, very excited for my guest, but first I want to let you know that Improvising Shakespeare, or rather Shakespeare Improvised, tonight and tomorrow, 8:15 tonight, 4:30 tomorrow. This is Brian Lohman's advanced Shakespeare class, doing Shakespeare Improvised, an entirely improvised show in the style of William Shakespeare, and we're going to be talking to our guest about Shakespeare as well. So please welcome to Impro Talk actor, writer, director, and all around awesome dude, Michael Manuel. From the outdoors.
Hey, I know.
I think you're only our second outdoor guest, maybe.
Lohman. Rebecca Lohman.
Rebecca Lohman.
Yeah. She's all about the outdoors.
Thank you so much for being here, Michael.
Yeah, of course.
So we talked a tiny bit before going live on our live stream, pre-recorded, about pronouncing your name, because I've always said Michael Manuel, I think, and some people say Michael Manuel, and then that led you into a little, an interesting sort of anecdote about how that comes about. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I grew up in Tacoma. I'm half Norwegian, half Puerto Rican, and I grew up in the Norwegian side. So I know lots about Lefse and Ufta and all kinds of Norwegian things, and lutefisk. And I grew up, saying Michael Manuel, and when I went to grad school, was the first time that my ethnicity was sort of brought to the forefront to me. It's the first time that they were doing a production at the Rep of Summer and Smoke, and typically first years aren't allowed to be in any of the shows. And there's a offstage scene where there's like gamblers, these Mexican gamblers, they're all speaking in Spanish, and they just assumed that I spoke Spanish, which I don't. And so it was the first time that I had this sort of address. And then I was in this production of Hamlet del Valle, which is a Hamlet version of Hamlet by a guy who was from Teatro Campesino, which was all, sort of Hispanic, Latino. And again, the assumption was made that, like, because of my last name, that I fit into this sort of category. It was surprising in a way, because it was something that I had never thought about. But then as time went on, I started to sort of take ownership of it. My family on the East Coast speaks Spanish, and so they pronounce the name differently. So um, when I got out of school, and a lot of the auditions that I was having, people made this assumption once again that you need to change your name, you need to do this and that. And I was sort of like, I'm not going to do that. And I wanted to take agency of my name. So when I'm doing something, I've done a couple of audiobooks this year, and I've read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and when I introduce I'm Michael Manuel for that. I've read some other ones, and I'm Michael Manuel. So when it suits me, I use it because why not? One other thing is they used to have this thing down at South Coast Rep called the HPP, Hispanic Playwrights Project, for many, many years. And it's funny, I started doing that. And one of the first sort of speeches that I felt like I had to make to the cast, to the people, was like apologizing for not speaking Spanish.
Wow.
And feeling like and also there was a part of me that was like resisting it, resisting wanting to do something because people wanted me to do this and said, no, you need to do this. And through that experience, it sort of once again gave me power over it, so that then I started to, I'm continuing to learn Spanish, and I, am becoming more comfortable with what makes me.
Yeah.
Look, I think that many of us make assumptions about people. You see something and then you just sort of make this assumption, and people see my name and they make an assumption, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's the thing that you do. And it's also like, then on the other side of it, how do I then take this thing that's being, presented to me? How do I take it? Do I take it in a way that's negative, or do I take it in a way that's positive? Is it neither? Is it just sort of like, it just is the way it is? And so anyway, so it's Michael Manuel or Michael Manuel. Either one is cool with me.
And leverage it to your advantage, as you should, because it's your identity that you're taking charge of. You mentioned Yale rep, and you are a Yale guy, a Yale grad.
Yeah, one of those guys.
But before we get to Yale, so growing up in Tacoma, in school and stuff, were you always raising your hand to volunteer for being in plays and doing things in class that were performing arts related? Or
no, I mean, I didn't really see a play. I didn't see a play until I was in high school. It was the first time I saw a play. I saw Death Trap at Tacoma Little Theater, I think it is. And I was like, wow, this is super cool. But no, I didn't. I think the closest thing that I had to being an actor was that, when you went around in class and you had to read, everybody had to read a little teeny bit of something. I was always frustrated, I was sort of like, kids would, sort of stumble, and like I'm doing now, but they would stumble and sort of hesitate and not, just read the thing. And so I was always like, come on, just read it. This is simple. Just do that.
Wow, it is so weird to hear you say that, because I have not thought about that, and I had that same feeling as a kid when you
were watching people read.
Yeah, like what's the deal?
Yeah. Wow. And not knowing, of course, I didn't have the sensitivity to think that like maybe this was something because they were having trouble reading, or because they were, shy, or just didn't feel comfortable, doing it. Because I mean, what is it they say that the thing that scares people the most is
Yeah,
public
public
speaking,
speaking, sure.
and I mean, so you have to be sensitive to the fact that it isn't just because in our minds, we're maybe reading faster or at a faster clip than we're able
Sure.
to speak, and
Yeah.
so like maybe it's just there's so many different things that could have been going on, of course, but I was a stupid kid, so.
But it kind of informed you, I guess, in a way that you had a different sort of sense of just reading aloud in class just maybe seemed to you like a thing that people should be able to do, or
Yeah, because for me, it was about this. It was about telling a story. It was
mm,
like once you start hesitating and sort of breaking it up, then the story kind of goes away. You lose the thread of what it is that's happening, and so you kind of need that flow for the consistency, so that what the story is that you're telling or listening to.
yeah.
You know?
And so did you, after you saw the first play that you saw, did you pursue that? Did you ask questions, say like, hey, how do people do this?
No, I had a teacher named Dennis McIntyre and in junior high, and he had his class. It was kind of an English class, sort of, but it was really it was about. He was a super cool guy about getting people to sort of let their personality out. They
Mm,
could kind of. It was a kind of free flowing class, and there was a lot of creativity that was um, encouraged, and so we wrote a play.
wow.
My I guess I was in eighth grade. I think I was in eighth grade, so that was the closest thing to drama that I'd ever done. But it was really about tell your story, and then we'll put it together and make a play. And it was cool because people had their whatever it was that was going on for them that they wanted to express. Either like, this is the little story that I want to tell, and then we put it together and then made a play out of it. Um, but in terms of like no, I had no aspirations to act or to do anything like that.
But
So
that sounds like a pretty
no.
great middle school teacher to have that
Yeah,
inspiration to do that. Shout out to him.
yeah, it was
That's
super
pretty
cool.
cool. So when does it start to kind of occur to you that maybe this is a storytelling and acting and that sort of thing is a kind of a thing you want to do?
Well, I thought at the end of high school, I thought there was a part of me that I thought maybe I would play sports, do something, and um, but I didn't really know. I kind of was lost. I didn't know what to do, and some friends of mine were going to University of Washington, and they said, "Well, we're renting a house, and so why don't you come up and just you know move up here and take class." And so I went to North Seattle Community College, and I took an acting class because I wanted typically I wanted to meet girls, and so it was uh, I thought it would be this really simple, silly class, and the woman that ran it, her name is Diane Hostetler, and she was wonderful, and the class itself was really good, and her husband Paul ran the directing program at the University of Washington, the training program, and so we were doing these scenes, and a friend of hers named Bob Hobbs, who ran the acting program at University of Washington, came to see the scenes, and he talked to me after the presentation, and he said, you should think about auditioning for schools. And I didn't even know that you could go to school for it. It wasn't even anything that I realized that one could do. And he said, I'm going to be leaving University of Washington. I'm going to Duke University, and I'm going to start a program. So you should, I suggest you go down, audition, for these different grad schools. And if you don't get in, then I'll take you as a student. And so I was like, oh, cool. Well, if I don't get into any of these places, then at least I'll go to, I'll be able to go to Duke, and which is pretty cool. It was really nice of him. And
Amazing.
so I went down to San Francisco and I auditioned for, Yale and ACT and Juilliard and all those schools and stuff. And, as happens for, a lot of people, when you're around that age and you find something that you latch onto, it becomes like, oh, this is this thing that I've been looking for. This is the thing that allows me to happiness and to be me, find myself in a way.
You've already mentioned at least 4 teachers who were formative in helping you discover and guide you in the direction of what your life's calling is. It's clearly teachers and directors and guides that we've all benefited from are critical. We wouldn't be where we are without going all the way back to middle school or grade school.
I've done so much children's theater and or I don't know what you call it, I guess children's theater, but for students, I've done lots of things with students, and in so many performances, there have been a number of performances where people aren't paying attention, but that there's always a couple people in there that are really getting it, or it's affecting them in some way, or it means something to them. And so it's that same thing. It's like that people don't realize the effect that some simple, silly thing, what for them, that they don't even think about how meaningful it is for somebody, or how meaningful it could be. I mean, Bob Hobbs or Diane Hostetler, the people that said, you're good at this, you should do this, or you should try, there was no giant, you're doing it for this reason. It was just sort of like, this is something you seem like you are enjoying and you seem good at. So here are some ways that you can go about doing that.
I mean, I just love the idea of go audition for a bunch of conservatory programs. If you don't get in those, you can come to Duke.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
Amazing.
I know, it's crazy, right?
As it happens, you end up at Yale and with Earl Gister and the whole lot. I full disclosure, I studied in New York with Ron Van Loo, and
okay, yeah.
I would guess that studying with a giant like Earl Gister had a profound effect on sort of taking you as a storyteller to the sort of the next level in your abilities in your craft.
Yeah, Earl was especially like with Chekhov, he especially with Chekhov was like a sort of master teacher of it. And everybody has tricks, right? Everybody's got tricks. You got tricks to get into the school. You got tricks when you're there. You have tricks that you see people use. And then you take those tricks into the real world. And a lot of times you don't get called on the tricks that you're using, the little things. And, Earl didn't suffer fools. And so he would just be like, that's bullshit. Oh, I'm doing this because he had the vocoder. So like his voice to me was like, that was his voice to me.
Through the electronic larynx,
the electronic thing. Because he was amazing at it too, because he could, it just vibrates and makes one sound, but he could change the tone of it. It had a string on it. And so sometimes before he spoke, he would do this and he would stroke, that sometimes meant, this idiot, I don't know what to say to this idiot, or it was like, that was really good. But I don't, how can I turn this into something that's going to be more meaningful than a compliment in the moment, something that you can take with you and remember forever.
That's such good direction and good teaching, is to not just praise the moment, but instead identify what worked and what maybe didn't work. And You tell a story about Earl taking a moment in class or in a rehearsal to kind of demonstrate what could be done with a character.
Oh, yeah.
Will you tell that?
Yeah, one of the first, we started with Chekhov, and we picked our scene partners, and then did a scene. And I remember I wanted to know, like, somebody was Therapont. Like, what do you do with Therapont? Like a guy that doesn't really have a lot of words. And I was 21, so I wasn't going to be playing him, but I wanted to do it because I wanted to see, like, what do you do when you're the one that's not talking the whole time? And how do you make that active? And how do you tell that story? And so I did my version. It was awful. And then I remember him standing up, and he didn't even speak. And he stood there and did sort of the scene, and you couldn't take your eyes off of him, because he was a person. He was like a whole complete person standing there. And through that, without even saying anything, it made me realize, and I think all of us realize, that, oh wow, this is like, there's a lot of work that goes into doing anything, but especially text that isn't as apparent as what it should be. It's cryptic, or you feel like you're speaking in codes. You're saying things that are like, why would you say that? Like, what are you talking about? Pancakes? Like, what does pancakes have to do with anything? And there's something that's so sort of beautiful about just being and standing and being, and that's what Earl did. And in that little scene where he played Farapont, and without really explaining, this is what you do, or I have to think of this is what my character's life is, or all I knew is that he was coming from someplace and he was going someplace. And when he entered the scene and when he left, and it was like, oh, okay, that's
yeah,
to think about.
It's such an education to realize that the text is not a prescription, and there's more to understand about the whole of the play and the whole of the characters and the relationships.
Oh yeah,
beyond just what the words are coming out of their mouth. And I think that's a bit of the magic that people, when people look at acting and say, what just do it.
right.
And they kind of don't understand that good acting, affecting acting, something that's going to make an impression, has a lot more to do it to do with, and characters come from a place, like you said, and you see on their face and in their body their whole life.
Yeah. One other thing about the first year class, which was fantastic, is that they made the directors take the acting class too, so that they were, while they had no interest, a lot of them, in being actors, it was a great sort of introduction into language. Like, how do you speak? Like, how are you going to communicate this to somebody? Because it's really easy to say, well, just do that, or do that better, or it gave them a sort of like template to say, like, oh, this shit is hard, and how do I communicate this through my own frustration, my own experience of how frustrated I am, to then be able to have some sort of bridge between once you're directing something and having had the experience of having to do it.
So you have relationships with many different theater companies. This is not an exhaustive list, but I just want people to understand a little bit about, so Yale rep, of course, but A Noise Within, a New Jersey Shakespeare, Shakespeare LA, South Coast rep, Interact, Berkeley rep.
Yeah.
But talk about the difference between just kind of showing up for the run of a show and then see you later versus finding a home at a place and with a team of directors and et cetera.
Well, I mean, I think it's one of the things that why improv for me was such a draw was the community. The fact that there was like this community of people that had worked together for so many years, because there's a secondhand, sort of nature that comes to it. It's like you don't even think about it. Like all of the breaking down that happens whenever I go do a show someplace that's new, there's so much waste. It's really wasted time. You're wasting time in this prearranged marriage, right? You're like wasting time getting to know somebody and figuring out how to be comfortable because, like everybody comes at it into it with whatever, everybody's scared in whatever way, and however that manifests itself, it manifests itself. And so for me, I know that, when I go in and I don't know people, I'm sort of like, oh boy, this is going to be rough and nobody's going to like me, they're going to hate me and whatever. And then you're building up to the point where you can just be comfortable with each other. And so it's comfort. It's like the comfort of knowing, when you do multiple shows, places, or you work with a company, it just feels comfortable. You just start to feel like you don't have to put up whatever the act is. You are the person that you are, this mask of, because it's all just fear and being scared and protecting yourself. And so you're sort of, it's sort of like, all right, let's just push all that shit aside and let's just get down to what the meat of it is. And also because of, over the years in, equity theater, it used to be when I started, it used to be you'd had 2 weeks of full previews and then you started a run of something, and rehearsal period was much longer. Now everything's so truncated that, I always feel the need to sort of go in already like off book and know, like I have to get rid of, I have to truncate my process as well. And so we can just get down to like, let's just start working. And I think some of that helps in terms of having a relationship with people, with a company of people, even if you don't know them. If you come in and you're sort of like, it's about the work, and you can sort of like, I don't have to worry about all of the nervous stuff that I am going to have anyway. I know it's going to be there anyway, and try to get as much of that out of the way and just get into being comfortable. Like how can I be comfortable?
Yeah, you can be made to feel like, you know what? Hey, we're all here for one thing. Let's all just dispense with the I guess social ice that we would be breaking, and just do the thing. So that does sound like pretty ideal when you return season after season to a company, or are a resident of a company, and you don't have to worry about that, where you get into a project and you can immediately start talking about the project.
Yeah.
Well, you certainly have. I mean, you are that. You enjoy that at a number of different places, and that speaks a lot about who you are as an artist and as a person. Because people don't, the life is too short to invite somebody back that you don't like working with.
Yeah, right. That's what it is too. I think, especially for, I mean, it's always interesting to when you see these, people that make movies and they use the same cast, they use the same sort of group of people always. Well,
right.
A lot of times it's because they're just comfortable with each other. They already know, and so they don't have to vet all of the people, like who's going to be, a jerk, and who's going to be, who's cool and who's not. And so it's all of that stuff gets down to people just want to do the work. They just want to tell the story. Like, what's the story? And too often you're bringing your own story into it, and it becomes like, do we have to go through that before we can actually? Okay, I guess if we have to go through that, we'll go through that. But It would just be easier if we could just get onto it.
That's an important message to particularly to younger creatives and artists and actors and storytellers, etc. Is, you know, check your baggage at the door. I mean, be yourself.
Yeah.
Make known your particular needs, but be willing to become part of the ensemble. I guess if that's maybe a ham-fisted way of putting it, but so I just want to touch on real quickly that you've done so much Shakespeare. Can you talk a little bit about 500 years of Shakespeare being kind of a cornerstone of acting and theater?
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, Shakespeare was like all the great writers, they're a master of the human condition. Like, and because the human condition doesn't change, it's the same, whether it's the Greeks or, you know, you can go as far back as you want to like a play that was written, you know, this afternoon. It's all about this thing that we're all going through. And Shakespeare, so many of those stories, it's just about, you know, base feelings, you know, love and hate and desire, and, you know, all of everything is in those plays. And it's done beautifully because it's painted in word pictures, and the language is so, you know, I'm, you know, I hadn't read Shakespeare, you know, I didn't really read Shakespeare in school or in high school or anything like that. And even when I did, I think like my senior year in high school, it was so, it felt so foreign. It felt so like not my experience. I didn't understand. It just felt like, I don't know what this is. And it is a different language. And it's the sort of beautiful thing that happens in any Shakespeare play that you go see, or that when you're in it, is that you notice for the first 10 or 15 minutes, you might have people that have never seen a Shakespeare play, and it's like they're learning a language. And over the course, after about 20 minutes or so, they start to understand. You can feel people understand, like, oh, I know what that means. Oh, I get that. I get what that, I understand what that is. And it's all these fancy words and things that we don't say, and big long thoughts and stuff. But at its base, it touches everyone, and you have to. When I love to do it, because I like to think of it as, this is this super cool thing that I didn't know about, that I want you to know about this thing too, because it will affect you and touch you in a way that might change your life, and you realize that you're not alone. Like, oh, I'm not alone in this feeling of whatever I'm having, jealousy or whatever it is. That, wow, this is somebody that's taken jealousy to the, you know, to the nth degree, and this is what happens when that happens, or this is what love is, or this is what, you know. And it's such a beautiful way to get poetry across without having to be poetical.
Yeah, I mean, not to say that Shakespeare isn't poetic or etc.
Oh, yeah.
But absolutely. I think what unfortunately isn't taught often enough, or wasn't taught to me anyway, was how accessible Shakespeare actually is if you sit down and take the time to help somebody understand what the language is, as you said.
Yeah.
Do you've done, I mean, Henry IV Part 1, Taming the Shrew, Comedy of Errors, Romeo and Juliet, As You Like It, Cymbeline, Midsummer's Twelfth Night, Hamlet, Othello. You've done so many productions. Do you have a favorite that you've done?
Have favorites for different reasons. You know, the production that I did of Othello was a favorite because I was so scared to do it.
Oh, really? Wow.
Iago has so many lines. There's so many lines that it feels so daunting. It feels like something that I was scared, like, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to remember all the words. I'm not going to be able to tell this story. How can I? It just I felt terrified. And so
Wow.
I worked on it for, for months every day, just to get all of those words in my head. And so it felt like a mountain. It felt like climbing a mountain. So it was a lovely production, and the people in it I loved very much. But it was also it felt like a triumph of for myself, like just for myself, whether it was good or not. It had nothing to do with being good or bad. It was just, can I do this thing? Can I climb up this hill?
Yeah.
And and then
So this is at A Noise Within, just before the pandemic, in modern day military
yeah.
setting. I mean, and in 2019, I mean, so you had your hand on the raw electrical pulse of what was going on, or what is going on in the world.
Right.
It must have been an intense part of the process, in addition to learning, these giant speeches and all these, that challenge as well.
Yeah, we had a military advisor. Gosh, I think it's Jack. I can't remember who it was.
Captain Jack Lazebnik. Does that sound right?
Yeah. But he helped us through some of the whatever the protocol, military protocol, and he actually had to leave partway through the production because he was deployed again.
Oh,
so it was,
wow.
it felt like the real world. It's like, oh wow, this is like real.
Wow.
So and you feel like I always feel a obligation to, when you make a choice about setting something in a place or taking real life situations, that not only the obligation that you have to the writer, Shakespeare, whoever it is, for the story they're trying to tell, but then if you're trying to tell another story about life within a whether it's a military, a modern military, situations that people have to go through, that you can't, I just feel like you can't slough that off. You have to sort of take it and be true to it, and be respectful of it and of the lives of people that's their, that's how they make their living. That's what they do. So they live their lives every day.
And that's another thing that you mentioned about Shakespeare, is how contemporary and real it is. There are real people today experiencing the things that Shakespeare was writing about back then.
Yeah.
And so every play is current and topical. Yeah. How did you go about tackling the mountain of lines and speeches that you had to learn? Like, maybe did you do anything different that you hadn't done for plays before?
Yeah, because it was Jessica Kubzansky directed it, and one of the things that we did together, we worked together, which was so lovely. I love her so much. We read the play, and then I would say we sort of cut it together. We did our cuts together of putting the play together. And then blocking off for myself, I literally have, and it's still in my office because I'm sort of proud of it as like a thing. I had dates and scenes that I had to learn things by, like I have to learn this chunk by this amount, this chunk, and this chunk, and this chunk. Or sometimes I would go through and do just the soliloquies and just do those things and see how I could, thread all of those things together. But really it was I got up at 4:30 or 5 every morning and worked for 2 hours and just did that every single day. And then I would sort of go to bed saying it. I would go to bed, I would just sort of in my, as I was falling asleep, say the words. And when I wake up, sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would just see where I would start something and see if I could do it.
Wow.
Like out of like a dead sleep, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to start this speech and see if I can remember anything. So it just became it just took over my life in a way,
Yeah.
And it wasn't even like the greatest place to live. It was also like not a great place, it's kind of a shitty place to be to be in that, to say those things, to have those, that's the part of it too. That's the part of it that, and it's also frustrating. You hear people's processes and, people talking about like, well, I do this and you can only refer to me in that. And I always think like, wow, I don't get that part of it, but I do understand living with something, it's hard not to live with it. We're, right now we're getting ready for, Jane Austen. And I feel like I'm living with Jane Austen all the time. I think about it. I listen to sort of music. I try to get the language into my thinking, into my dreams, so that I'm just always thinking about it, so that I don't have to think about it. Because the thing about it is that it's about forgetting it, really, right? It's about being relaxed enough that you're not thinking about the technical part of it, although it's very technical. And there's lots of, especially with Shakespeare, there's lots of sort of things rules that you don't have to, but that people follow. And that, there's a sort of, it's written in a way that tells you it's giving you instruction on how to do it. But in order to do it successfully at any level, you have to kind of forget all of that stuff and just have it be like what we had when I did Romeo and Juliet, and Ken Saverton, who was a lovely man. He was a company member at the RSC for many, many years, but he always played sort of those small roles, but a company member, right? And he would say before we started Romeo and Juliet, maybe it'll be okay. Like maybe it'll be okay tonight, and to think about that it isn't that you're playing the end of this play, that there's this hopefulness when you start that play that, hey, maybe they'll get together and it'll all work out.
Gosh, that's so funny. I think about I just watched the famous film production, the Zeffirelli.
Zeffirelli.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And while I was watching it, I was like, I think there's a chance that this works out.
Right. Yeah.
But what a wonderful way to go into a scripted piece, is just to say, to have the cast say to one another, like, hey, maybe who knows how this ends, and,
yeah.
Don't play the end at the beginning, I guess you end up doing a production of Hamlet with Paul Giamatti, who is also a student of Earl Gister.
Mm-hmm.
Were you close? Did you talk about Earl Gister when you were working with him?
We didn't talk about Earl. We were in school together, so we knew each other. We've known him since we were in school together. The thing that was interesting is that, Paul hadn't done he'd been doing so many movies that he was in. I remember him feeling like he was in a box in a way, right?
Mm.
And that we had an extra, I think we had 3 months of rehearsal for that, which is unheard of. And he was so wonderful he ran around like when we were first starting. It was like, I've had to like do it like this for so long that I want to fucking run around and do, everything. And it was glorious to watch him. The thing that was interesting is that, my we did. I was I was Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, so I was Guildenstern, and Paul and I spent a lot of time hanging out, just going to, and having meals and stuff, and feeling like, the interesting thing is that I'm, knowing, all these people when nobody's anybody, right? And then all of a sudden somebody is famous. And we took the sort of reality of that with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, that like we were friends, we grew up together. We always wanted to go to his house because his house was the coolest and it like had the most stuff, and then like we just were kind of glomming on to him now that he was, famous. He's like the famous Hamlet guy. And in the same way, it was sort of like, oh, hey, we were pals when we were, nobody, and now he's somebody. I'm still nobody, but I'm, hanging on, just hanging on, always glomming on. And there was something sort of lovely and meta about it.
Yeah.
We'd be walking down the street and, constantly, people like wanting a picture or an autograph. But the thing that was, but the shorthand that we had with each other was lovely, because there were times I remember just many times on stage when I would be doing some stupid, silly thing and he would look at me, and it wasn't Hamlet really looking at Guildenstern. I was Steve Guildenstern, by the way. And he would look at me and he was like, fucking Michael. And there was something about that relationship that you can't, kind of happens because somebody. It was lovely too that there was like a lottery to get into that show.
Oh, really? I was going to say that like being in a show with an ensemble that knows one another and being maybe an outsider, you kind of miss the shorthand that people have, like we were talking about earlier. But the sort of the opposite end of that continuum is knowing somebody so well that there's like a second or even a third tier of communication going on between you during the play. Also at A Noise Within, you do a production of Frankenstein, and you're the creature. This is the Nick Dear play adapted from Mary Shelley. Was it exhausting being the monster every night? The creature?
It was super exhausting. It was another one of those things where I was super scared, but for a different reason. We spent, we had a 1 week. Michael McKetty was the director, lovely, and Rhonda Cole was the movement person, and it was just us for a week. It was just us figuring out how to move and how to learn to do all this stuff. And I did a little reverse engineering. I watched all these YouTube videos of people. People document when they have ALS. Sometimes they document their lives as their bodies begin to degenerate and they sort of lose function. And I sort of watched them from the end to the beginning to figure out like movement, loss, like not knowing how to move, not knowing how to, watching a lot of babies, learn to walk for the first time. And physically, I knew that it was going to be taxing on my body, but also I have like tons of people. I mean, I have huge body issues, always have my whole life. And I was embarrassed by like, oh, what am I going to have to wear, because it calls for him to be naked. And we're like, all right, well, if we're going to have to do that, then I guess that's what we'll do. And taking all of that fear and feeling like, oh my God, I'm going to look so bad in front of people. And how do you get past, like, because all of that is ego stuff, right? And like, how do you get past that and just say, this is just who it is. This is who I am. This is what I look like, and who cares, you know? And you have to sort of, I had to sort of forget and um, uh, just let be what was going to be. And uh, you know, when the first 15 minutes of that play, you know, was sort of like the birth, and it was there were no words, you know, it was just movement. And it was hard because you just don't want to look stupid, you know, you just don't want to look dumb. And there's a part of it that, like, I had to get past the, like, say, well, fuck that, like, I just have to, like, I just have to be, and whatever it is, it is. If I look bad, then I look bad. If I just had to forget all of that stuff, and and there was something so liberating and wonderful about the freedom of just accepting yourself for who you are. And especially because that a lot of that play is about, you know, the other, somebody being the other, and you know, judging this creature who knows nothing and is being abused by all these people because of the way he looks and what he is, and the resonance of that just felt so real and timely, and it felt like, yeah, this is what, you know, people go. There's one story that I'm sort of, we did a lot of student matinees, and one, for the most part, the kids were fantastic, but there was one particular show where this group of young boys were laughing a lot during the show, and especially during the beginning, and I knew that they were just laughing at me, and so it was hard. It was hard just in terms of concentration and everything. There was part of it that's sort of like, you know, you're accepting that, like, they're laughing at, you know, the creature, and this is what the creature has to go through, and so that this is just what it is. This is the pain of what all of that is. We would do these talkbacks afterwards, you know, and I didn't go to the talkback, and I'm so ashamed of this right now. I didn't go to the talkback that day because I was pissed. And there was a kid that spoke up who was autistic and said, that's my life every day. And I was like, I was so moved that this, you know, that this kid had this experience, that he saw something that validated his life. And I was ashamed, Michael, I was ashamed that I didn't, you know, just step up and go out there and talk to them, forgetting that there's always somebody, there's always one person that is getting something that, you know, has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the experience, you know.
What a huge lesson, and what a, like, forgive the expression, but what a gift that kid did, saying that, you know.
Yeah.
What an amazing thing to bring forward for all of us to keep in mind. There's always someone who you're reaching. You don't know it.
Yeah.
You may never know it, but there's probably someone that you're reaching. Yeah, you win the LA Drama Critics Award for the creature, for Frankenstein, and that must feel good, for all the pain and
it is nice. It's nice to be, you know, I think, I mean, it is the thing that I always feel like people say, like, when they win an award, or they get nominated, or they don't, or whatever, and they say, oh, it's bullshit, it doesn't mean anything anyway. Well, the thing in itself maybe doesn't. It's, all it really is that somebody's recognizing you. All of this is somebody just saying, like, oh, that was really cool that you did that. Yeah. You know, and so for me, it doesn't go anything beyond that, because all of the rest of the stuff, because there's probably people that was terrible. So it's like, it doesn't matter. It's like, it was more like, I know what my experience was with it, and my experience was more valuable than all the rest of that, all
yeah,
other stuff. And I appreciate it. But
you do like you do a lot of you do guest lecturing and teaching and directing for high school age people and college age people. When you're talking to, I guess, artists in their formative years, what's your motto?
Well, what I've done, I've done some of that. I spent many years in different programs. One was called Playwrights in the Schools, run by the Skirball people, and then another program, um, Teresa and Rose. I can't remember the name of their. I don't know if it was about productions or what it was, but they had a program which basically you go into these at-risk schools, and a writer works with the students, and then they bring in actors to read their plays, and it was some of the most important stuff that I've ever done for people that were no one saw it, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I remember, this one day we came in, and it was a school down in Compton, and this kid, they were supposed to come up with their first scenes, and this kid hadn't done it, and I said, hey, why don't you come over here? And we went and hung out by this computer, and I said, just tell me what you did yesterday. And he said, me and my buddy went to this Korean grocery store, and this guy came in, this lady was like yelling at us, and then we said blah blah blah, and so she told this whole story, and then I handed it to an actor named Richard Coca, and said, and he read it as a monologue, and I said, there's your story, man. You wrote a play. Like, there's your play right there. So the thing that I say to people is that you have a story to tell. Like, everybody has a story to tell, and all of the stories are invaluable. They're precious and need to be listened to. So you have a voice, I guess, is the thrust or the motto that I have.
I love that. That's so wonderful that you took that moment, take him aside, and say, like, all right, let's just talk, just guy to guy. What happened yesterday?
Right. Yeah.
After a play, when you're meeting audience members, or when you go into a school and you're teaching or doing that sort of project that you talked about, people come up and ask advice about auditioning, or ask advice about what school they should apply to, and ask advice about acting generally or directing.
Well, so I do some coaching, and I've coached for kids that want to go to grad school, want to go to some kind of training school. And the thing that I try to emphasize to them is that there is no one path to do anything, and that if I had any advice, it would be like, just take a regular liberal arts education. Like, like, everything that you do is going to contribute to this more than you imagine, and that the sooner you start sticking yourself in a box of, like, this is what I am, and this is who I am, and this is what I do, you're just limiting yourself. You're just cutting everything else off in something that you're not going to do, that you have no interest in, really, because you'll find that you become interested in it, and it will inform other things that you do later on, because you can always do this, and everything that you do contributes to this. Yes, that's what I tell them. Does that make sense?
Of course it does. So you've done, as well as theater, you've done film and television, things like Medium and Law and Order and Without a Trace and Charmed and ER. And has there been, you've done musicals. What's going on when you first get a look at the material, or first get asked to read it?
Well, I think this may be more a product of my some of the things that what I audition for. So oftentimes the material is just not very good. It just seems, it just doesn't seem very good. It's not very interesting. It's not really well written. It's just a bunch of crap. And so it's hard because you're trying to make this kind of crappy thing into something that means something. And it feels snotty to say it, but it's sort of like if you spend your life working on, like, there's a reason that some of these plays are done for hundreds of years. It's because they're beautifully written and thought out, and some stuff is just not. And so you're asked to do something, to bring something to it that doesn't really exist. And at that point, it feels like really what you're investing in is the relationship between the other characters, and like how do I connect with, what is this connection that I'm making with somebody else? I mean, at its best, that's what you want. I mean, that's exciting no matter what it is. But years ago when I've auditioned for a bunch of stuff that was like, I auditioned for, what's that movie? Being John Malkovich. And I remember, like, when you get something like a script like that that's so amazing that you feel like, oh wow, this is I'm always just happy to get any script at all.
Is there either a Shakespeare role or a Chekhov role or a Moliere or something that you haven't had the chance to bite into that you would like to?
I'd like to play Lopakin in The Cherry Orchard. I would really like to do that eventually. I've always wanted to do Mackers. You dream of, like, someday you're like, oh, I would love to play, Lear, and those parts. There's a reason that people want to do something like that. And again, it's an endurance test. It's like when people talk about doing those things, it's like they're just scared that they're not even be able to do them, because they're just they're so daunting, and they have so much baggage around them in a way. And it's really clearing away all of that and getting to the reason that you really want to do it is because you get to tell this complete sort of beautiful journey, of someone's life or a piece of someone's life. And those are the kinds of parts that I would like to do.
Also in Shakespeare, traditionally, actors talk about, like, when I'm old enough, I'd like to endeavor this. But I always take a little bit of solace that Simon Russell Beale toured Hamlet when he was in his 40s. Like he was like, you know what, I'm doing Hamlet. Well, Michael, thank you so much. Looking forward to Jane Austen.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Impro Theater will be presenting Jane Austen Unscripted at the Gary Marshall Theater in April, and I and Michael will both be amongst the cast. It's outdoors, which is exciting. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.